It's time for the Roots and Roots Show with your host, Greg Rashid, bringing you history and music from the Black American diaspora. Greg and his guests' goal is to root the show's information in your psyche, providing you the roots to expand knowledge within your community. Now here's your host, Greg Rashid.
Well, I want to greet you, as I always greet you, coming here from Bangkok, Thailand, by saying Sawasdee Krap, which means hello in Thai. This is Greg Rashid again with another edition of the Root and Roots Show. For many people, they listen at it at their convenience on various platforms on the internet. And I want to say hi to all those folks who are listening in India. I got folks there who continue to listen in. Also, actually, I see there's a couple of people listening in Myanmar, and there's a huge struggle there going on. What a lot of you in the world, if you're listening in the U.S., probably are not even aware of, but there's a genocidal struggle going on in Myanmar. And I want to say hi to everyone, every country that listens in, but a lot of folks that don't listen in at their convenience, they tune in every Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. Mountain Time on KUHS Denver.com, created by the one and only who's getting his bag and costume together for Halloween, the one and only Henry Archuleta. I want to say hi to all my friends in the Colorado region. I'm going to be back there. I'm working on I'm coming back to visit next year. I'm doing something. I've been invited to go to a Negro League convention in Cooperstown, New York. I'm really thinking about going to this. I'm hoping to start a Kickstarter to get me there. That would be fun. But anyway, we're gonna have another show here. It's gonna be a little different this time. We're not gonna really be doing music. The first half of the show, I'm gonna interview. Actually, I interviewed him, but we decided he'd just do it himself, and then I would put his recording on the air. And I'm talking about my friend Bijan Bain, who's right now living here in Thailand. He's in Hua Hin, and we're gonna listen to his interview in a minute. But it's a funny thing. I've had no problems when he was in America interviewing him on the show. He comes to Thailand, all of a sudden we can't get the interview together. The signals aren't working. It's so weird. So he had to tape this interview here. So right now, let's listen to Bijan talking about his experiences being here in Thailand, moving in, and it's just really something. I know a lot of you, you've heard me talk about it, but I wanted to get a different perspective from another African American male. So let's hear that right now on the Root and Root Show.
This is Bijan C. Bain. I was born in Massachusetts and raised in Boston and Washington, D.C. Around 2020, 2021, I started researching possibility of moving to Thailand or another Southeast Asian country. There was no specific reason. Some of the reasons I got interested was a friend sent me a link to a YouTube video of a gentleman touring high-rise apartments in Bangkok, and in the YouTube description or the thumbnail, it was titled something like $400 a month USD high-rise or apartments in Bangkok. And I watched the tour, hadn't thought too much about Thailand specifically. This was maybe either during the pandemic or a little bit before it or early in the pandemic. I'm thinking maybe 3 years ago. And so I watched that tour, and it's the buddy that sent it to me, he and I talk pretty often. He's about 5 or 6 years younger than I. But he and I had moved to Miami Beach right around the same time. Not at that time, but about a year and a half later. He moved to Miami in February of 2021, I guess, and I moved there in July. But at any rate, we've been close friends for more than 30 years. And sometimes we talk about, different things that we want to do later on and different things that we don't want to do later on. He's about 57 now. And so I think after that, maybe on my own, without any prompting, I looked up more things about Thailand because I thought that maybe the thumbnail was more or less clickbait and hyperbole, and it might be an outlier situation. I didn't know anybody, really close that lived in Thailand per se, or Bangkok specifically, but the place looked nice. That the gentleman was touring with a Thai woman who might have been in her, I don't know, mid-20s. And it was just a thought process. And I was also coming toward the age, maybe in a year or two, where I'd be eligible to receive Social Security, which is not, a ton of income in my case. So eventually, I started watching and subscribing to vloggers or YouTubers who were either expats in Thailand, not specifically Bangkok per se, or were touring and showing different aspects of things that they did in Thailand. And I became, a little bit more interested. Not interested enough to investigate a move, but I did want to take a trip there, for instance, because I felt I could learn more in person. And, after the pandemic restrictions eased and things of that nature, and some things in my part-time work, full-time work, freelance work situation allowed, I started thinking about when might be a good time to visit Southeast Asia. And that led to looking at airfares and airlines and time frames. And then I discovered that something that I kind of overlooked is that a gentleman who, as a boy, lived on the same street I did, but about 3 years before my family lived there in D.C. He lived on the other side of the street, but it's literally the same 100 block of the same street in a small section of Washington. And his Facebook profile, it says Bangkok. So I had kind of slept on the fact that he was living there. I didn't know how long. I didn't know under what circumstances or any of those things. I hadn't asked him. And we weren't really close, but I think by that time I had been on his radio show. And so that felt like somebody that I could ask questions if a trip was impending or imminent. And so I visited Thailand for the first time between April 12th and May 7th of 2023. I landed right at the beginning of Songkran, which is the celebration of the New Year, more like a water festival celebration of the New Year, spiritual cleansing and rebirth that has a lot to do as a metaphor with water, a sprinkling of water, and sometimes has been sort of appropriated into the splashing of water, the dunking of water on people, even strangers. And in some towns it takes on full-blown levels, almost Mardi Gras levels of people tossing pails of water on people or squirting them with hoses in the big tourist towns. And some of the smaller or quieter towns that don't have as many bars and nightlife establishments, you don't really see that. A city called Jomtien, you don't see a lot of people splashing strangers or hosing strangers or walking up to them and smearing face paint on their faces, which is another aspect of the New Year festival. And in a city called Hua Hin, you don't see that as well, at least in the parts of Hua Hin that I stayed in during part of Songkran. But the festival lasted anywhere between 10 and 13 days in some of the large tourist cities, and probably 3 days in some of the more remote, for lack of a better term, or provincial towns, because they adhere to sort of the original commemoration or celebration of the New Year, and not the aspects that came into it later on. And I say those things to say I landed literally the first day of it. And in 2023, Thailand was celebrating a full-on Songkran for the first time, because in the 3 previous years they had been limited by pandemic mandates in terms of how long the festival would be celebrated, where people could go, physical contact. And so 2023 was the first big New Year's since 2019. So it probably took on some outsized characteristics because people hadn't really been able to do it fully, at least in the cities that I visited, for quite some time. So that was understandable. But I did land, right smack during the beginning of that, because in most places where I was, it was like a 12 or 13 day event. And so I got to see the country during that. And it's also, April is their warmest month. So I got to see Bangkok and experience Hua Hin, which is about a 5-hour bus ride north of another city I stayed in, a beach city called Jom Chin. At least by bus, it's 5 hours. During the warmest month of the year. Very, 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 very hot month if you're walking around taking the Bangkok subway or running errands or going to get something to eat at a convenience store or a night food stand. Super hot. And remember, I've lived in Miami Beach and I've lived in D.C. So, and I've been to Cuba, Puerto Rico, Belize, 6 or 7 different parts of Mexico, Curacao. I've been to all those places. But Thailand's very warm in April. I came back in June and I stayed from June 12th to May 7th, I believe. No, April was the 12th to May 7th. So June 21st to about July 13th, something like that. This is a 30-day tourist visa, so I stayed almost the entire 30 days. And didn't stay in Jom Chin really that time. I stayed in Hua Hin, like 3 or 4 days at a time, at times. Pattaya, which is right next to Jom Chin. They're like neighboring cities, beach cities. And a little bit in Bangkok, but not as long in Bangkok as the first visit, when I was sort of acclimating myself and getting to know Thailand. So I was in Bangkok for a few days just to, rest and recoup from jet lag. So the second trip, met more people, saw some YouTubers, just running into them by happenstance, met them in person, people whose channels I watched or subscribed to, knew the lay of the land a little better, names of some of the malls in Pattaya in Bangkok, and sort of how to get to the ones in Bangkok by train, although I did have to, refresh my memory and ask a few times at the stations, the station attendants, because they have 2 systems. They have a SkyTrain system and they have an underground system. So sometimes you have to transfer from one to the other. They're not really related in a certain sense to get directions, because your destination, you start from, say, your hotel or someplace. But to get to your destination, your final destination, you need to transfer to the other system. And they can't give you it in the one that you're initiating your trip with. They don't have maps and routes and the names of the stations for the other one, and vice versa when you're on your way back. So that can be a little tricky to a newbie like me. And just had fun. Like I said, met new people. Obviously met people that were not YouTubers, but the YouTubers are, of course, recognizable to me and other people when you bump into them on the street because you've seen them on camera. And so started thinking seriously about moving and finding, a 1-bedroom there. And so one of the things I did when I first got back was plan a 3rd trip. Now, all 3 of these trips, I only bought one-way tickets. I bought one-way tickets because I didn't know how long I was literally going to stay. I knew it was going to be close to the 30 days that the tourist visa allows upon arrival, but I didn't know whether it was going to be 28, 27, 26, because you're doing things, you're switching towns, you're meeting people, you're trying different experiences, and you don't know, like, if I meet somebody and then they invite me to something, or if I find out how to do something, or where is the best place to buy something, and it's the last day and I've already got a ticket. Things change back in the States. You don't want to have to change your flight or change your return because you were having a good time, or because you extended a hotel stay, or somebody offered you an opportunity. So I always buy one way because it's far less expensive, and since I'm staying more than 3 weeks anyway, I can always buy the return at least 2 or 3 weeks out when I'm already in Thailand, because I monitor the return fares on an app or website that I subscribe to, so I can see the return fares as they're going up and down. They fluctuate a little bit, and then I can jump on one, let's say halfway into my trip, but it's still 14 or 17 days out, if that makes any sense. But it's a lot less expensive that way. And it allows you the freedom of not being fixed to a return date if you're right in the middle of something like looking at apartments, or somebody says, oh, I can do this on such and such a day, and you say, oh, wow, I wish I wasn't flying back on that day, or I'm flying back before that. And so the third trip, the third trip is September. So I came to Thailand again. I left the U.S. September 7th, which means you don't land in Bangkok until the 9th, because you lose a day in the airborne because of the time zone difference. And I've been here ever since. And then in, I say, probably 3 weeks into my trip, I did look at some one bedrooms in person through two different people that have real estate ties. One who actually lists places like condos and apartments and studios, and she might list homes as well. She was raised a lot in Northern California, but she's Thai, and she and her husband and their children lived in France for several years, but they moved back to Thailand a few years ago. So she's Thai, and so she speaks the fluent English of a person who was raised in Northern California, and also speaks French. And she showed me a place or two, and then another gentleman who has they both have YouTube channels, but another gentleman who's retired U.S. military, has lived in Thailand about 20 years, is from L.A., also showed me a property a little later than that in my stay. And the property that he showed me, I told him I'd like to fill out a rental application on. And it's on Wangama Beach, which is in a part of the city that I named previously, Pattaya, the neighboring city to Jomtien. Jomtien is my first preference to move to because it's a little quieter than Pattaya. And I still may live in Jomtien at some point. But when I looked at this apartment, it was on the edge of the upcoming, what they call high season here. And in high season, which some people say begins late October, some people say November, but it kind of goes through November, December, January, when it's very cold and chilly in countries like the UK, where a lot of people come here to vacation from, or Ireland, or some of those type of countries in the West. Tourism here peaks when it's cold in those countries, and those countries are experiencing their winter. So that's when the high season starts. You can argue whether it's early November, mid-November, or towards Western Christmas, Western New Year, what have you. But even apartments raise their rates during high season, and so do hotels that have 1 month long-term stays, where you can, instead of booking your room for 7 days or 10 days or a night at a time as you're looking at other properties, and say, oh, the hotel's 3 blocks around the corner, and they are this much less per night, and I toured it, or they let me look at a room, I'm going to switch and stay here. So rather than doing that, sometimes people book their hotels, for a while. Some people even live in them because it's, relatively inexpensive to live in a hotel here compared to, I'll just use this as a frame of reference, in the States. Or they live in them while they're looking at apartments and condos and making decisions, or they live in them during a certain season, like high season or 2-month vacation or break or what have you. Depends on whether they're retired or not. Not everyone that tours Thailand or is considering living in Thailand doesn't work anymore. So with high season coming, the rate that he quoted me monthly was a good rate, even if it was going to go up a little bit in the high season. And it turns out that it isn't. So I filled out an application for that one and should be moving in later part of the month. My backup apartment, if something happens and I don't get that apartment, through the process or the application, is a place in Hua Hin, but it's a hotel that I've stayed at, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times during my 3 visits to Thailand. And I would do that by the month. The first month would start late October, about a week and a half from now. So either way, depending on what happens with the application process, with the Wangamat Beach place in Pattaya, if I don't get that place, the lady that owns the hotel in Hua Hin has agreed to lease me that monthly, or at least the first month. And so that's where that process is. And like I said, the reasons were just very safe country, a super respectful culture, relatively easy to get around in the cities that I stay in because they're tourist cities. They're not tourist cities, of course, the Thais, but I mean, there's cities that have a certain degree of tourism. And it's not just Western tourism. There's a lot of Korean tourists, a lot of Indian tourists, some Japanese tourists, and some Chinese. It's not just all Brits, U.S., I know this isn't West, but Aussies, Irish, Germans. There are a lot of Asians that tour Thailand, especially in groups. And I won't name which countries come in groups and which don't, because that's beside the point. But very safe. Many, many, many places to eat, whether they be in the stores, food courts in the malls, outdoor food courts, night food markets, farmers markets, food stands, street vendors with individual carts, many restaurants. It's a food. One of the first things you notice here is that people eat when they're hungry. They eat in front of their work establishment, sitting down. Sometimes if they work a job where you take a break out front, like a massage establishment or a barber shop or a beauty salon, you'll see the staff sitting out front eating whenever they're eating. Food that they either had stopped a cart while it was going down the street and waved the cart over because they had a taste for something on the cart, or one of the staff had walked to a nearby cart or street market, or they had ordered it on their phones, or some kind of combination thereof. But and then you see people eating it in the outdoor food courts, in the mall food courts. Most of the relatively large malls, the entire lower level, which is a level below the street level, is a large food court with different restaurants inside. And some of these malls are like 8 stories high, especially in Bangkok, and some of them a couple of them in Pattaya are like 8 levels high. But the entire ground floor, the entire area of the building with all the stores above it is occupied by a food court. And you can imagine how big the space area of a mall is if there's nothing in that lower level of the mall but restaurants. And some of them have restaurants on more than just that level too, like themed restaurants for different countries on different floors, or themed restaurants for different international cities on different floors. But food is one of the things you notice a lot. You notice temples and Buddhist places, shrines, things like that a lot. So it's a very respectful culture. Very little visible crime, very little visible police, even in tourist towns and even in towns that have a lot of bars. So you almost never see police, which is interesting for places that have a lot of bars. So there must not be very many altercations or disturbances either between tourists or expats, or between expats and Thais, or expats and tourists, or any combination thereof. For there to be that much alcohol available, and you almost never see a police or police car, that told me a lot. I like the climate. It's easy to meet Thai people. It's relatively easy to meet people that are not Thai, depending on your interest in or lack thereof of meeting them or engaging them. It's very modern. The apartments and the housing are very contemporary in terms of design and in terms of amenities and things like that. And it's very close to, I don't want to keep using the adjective very, it's convenient to fly in 3 hours or less to the Philippines, to which I've never been, Vietnam, to which I've never been, and Cambodia, which I've only been just very, very briefly, not even in the country, but just to the border to extend my tourist visa by 30 more days during my current stay. So the fact that I can fly to a Hanoi, I can fly to a Cebu, a Ho Chi Minh City, and even beyond that, if I want to visit at this point, Kuala Lumpur or Indonesia, those flights are much shorter and far less expensive than they would be if I was visiting those countries the first time from the U.S. And so, there's many, many other things that I enjoy about the little bit of time that I've been in Thailand. But those are some of the main reasons why I pulled the proverbial trigger on what will be a move pretty soon. And like I said, I really haven't had any major problems. So I didn't anticipate any major problems during the cultural adjustment, the adjustment to climate, the adjustment to moving around and getting around, such as rideshare apps, a little bus that I won't explain. It's like a pickup truck that you get on the back of. They call it a bot bus because their currency is the bot. And there's other ways of getting around, some of which I'll probably never use while I'm here because they're just not as safe to a Westerner that's not used to that mode of transportation in heavy traffic. And I generally pick apartments that allow me to walk to a night market, convenience store, gym, or 9 times out of 10, the place that I'm living in will have its own fitness center, and clothes shopping and things like that. Or if they aren't close enough to do all of those things, like the retail shopping or the department store shopping or the mall, they're so close that they would be maybe like a short, like I said, the pickup truck, they call it a bot bus ride, maybe 5-10 minutes, 15 tops in a Pattaya or a Jomtien or a Hua Hin. Or if I use the rideshare apps that are the prominent ones here, which are like analogous to their Uber and Lyft, they'd still only be about 10 minutes in a car. So there wouldn't be, I wouldn't be renting a motorbike. I wouldn't be buying a motorbike, and I'm not in the market to buy a vehicle here. This is a right side driving forward country, similar to Jamaica. And so the driver's steering is on the right-hand side of the car. And I'm enjoying my stay again, and I may be on this show other times to discuss other things that have nothing to do with Thailand, as I've been a guest more than once. But those are some of the things that I'm experiencing as a Boston and DC kid from the Eastern Seaboard in his first encounter with a Southeast Asian country. As I visit some of the other Southeast Asian countries, I might have some thoughts to share about those. But this is a jumping off point for the host and myself to delve more deeply into some of the things that I touched on here or just scratched the surface of, maybe through a full-blown interview or Q&A. I'm sure there's things that I left out that I'll wish after this recording that I had mentioned. But that's me. I'm Bijan C. Bain. I'm an author, a freelance marketing person, and brand manager who is transitioning to the expat life.
And I want to thank Bajan for doing that talk there. I mean, that takes a lot to talk about yourself for, that long. So I'm really proud that he did that and proud of, what he's been doing over here thus far. And he'll be on the show again. We'll be interviewing him when we get the connections clear. And again, like I said at the beginning of this program, it's so amazing. It's been so easy to interview him one on one when he's in America, but he gets over here, and all of a sudden we can't get the connection together as far as the Wi-Fi. So I don't know, because Wi-Fi here is basically great, but but you never know. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that talk, and we're gonna switch gears right now because I did it a long time ago on this show. Actually, before I got on KUHS, on another program I had, I did an interview with Connie Fields, and she is the producer and director of a film called Al-Him, Alhelm, Martin Luther King in Palestine. And some of you have followed me over the years may remember that interview with her. But basically, it's about a documentary she did in Palestine back in 2012. She took a group of college students and some church folks went to Palestine to do a play about Martin Luther King meeting Malcolm X. And that, just right there is amazing. A play about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in Palestine. And I have to say, this is one of the most profound documentaries, films I've ever seen. I'm going to recommend it to you now highly. I'm hoping to get Connie back on here because of what's going on in the Middle East right now. It's very important that you listen, to get this DVD, and it's on clarityfilms.org. Clarityfilms.org. Really check this out. It's very important, because it gives a black perspective on what's going on in Palestine. And yes, this documentary is over 10 years old, but it's still relevant. It's relative to what's going on right now and over there. And the person who got this group together is Clyburn Carson. And he's the historian for the Martin Luther King family. He's written a great encyclopedia on Dr. King. And he got this together. And it's just, you have to get this documentary. You really have to get it. I praised it over 10 years ago when it first came out. And I'll always praise this thing. Because if you don't know anything about what's going on in Palestine, what's going on in the Middle East, in Israel and Palestine, and a lot, the information you get from what I look at from here in Bangkok, and I look at the U.S. news from time to time to see how they spin things. It's fun. I mean, frankly, you're not getting all the information of what's going on over there. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to just let you listen to some information about the history, more or less, of what's going on in Israel and Palestine, starting with a statement, couple of statements from Amnesty International. And I'm going to use my AI voice friend Clyde to talk about these two things. And I hope, listen very carefully, just because I know, and like I say, on this station I'm on right now, KUHS, I don't think anyone is talking about the situation that's going on over there in Israel and Palestine. And a lot of folks are very hesitant to talk about it, but it's important because this is world changing. It's affecting everyone. And I really was, I've been meaning to talk about the situation. I've been waiting. And when I saw President Biden, your president of America, last week saying on an interview that the U.S. had enough money, they have billions of dollars, they can fund two wars in Palestine and also in the Ukraine. That really jarred me. That really got me. You have no free health care in America. You got homeless folks. You got people, looking for jobs. But you got the money to fund war. That really bothered me. But anyway, let you hear these little statements about what these come from Amnesty International. And if you're not aware of Amnesty International, they look at human rights. That's easy for me to say. human rights violations all over the world, and they report on them. So they've been around forever. So let's hear this right now on the Root and Root Show.
Since its establishment in 1948, Israel has pursued a policy of establishing and maintaining a Jewish demographic hegemony and maximizing its control over land to benefit Jewish Israelis, while restricting the rights of Palestinians and preventing Palestinian refugees from returning to their homes. In 1967, Israel extended this policy to the West Bank and Gaza Strip, which it has occupied ever since. Amnesty International has analyzed Israel's intent to create and maintain a system of oppression and domination over Palestinians and examined its key components: territorial fragmentation, segregation and control, dispossession of land and property, and denial of economic and social rights. It has concluded that this system amounts to apartheid. It has also documented unlawful acts committed by Israel against Palestinians with the intent to maintain this system, including forcible transfers, administrative detention and torture, unlawful killings, denial of basic rights and freedoms, and persecution. It has concluded that such acts form part of a systematic as well as widespread attack directed against the Palestinian population and amount to the crime against humanity of apartheid. Israel must dismantle this cruel system, and the international community must pressure it to do so. All those with jurisdiction over the crimes committed to maintain the system should investigate them. 1. The Israeli authorities to immediately end unlawful attacks and abide by international humanitarian law, including by ensuring they take all feasible precautions to minimize harm to civilians and damage to civilian object, while refraining from direct attacks on civilians and civilian objects and indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks. Immediately allow unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza's civilians. Urgently lift their illegal blockade on Gaza, which amounts to collective punishment and is a war crime. Resign their appalling evacuation order, which has left more than 1 million people displaced. Grant immediate access to the Independent Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory to carry out investigations, including collecting time-sensitive evidence and testimonies. 2. Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups to immediately end deliberate attacks on civilians, the firing of indiscriminate rockets, and hostage-taking. They must release civilian hostages unconditionally and immediately. 3. The international community, and particularly Israel's allies, including EU member states, the US and the UK, to take concrete measures to protect Gaza's civilian population from unlawful attacks. Impose a comprehensive arms embargo on all parties to the conflict, given that serious violations amounting to crimes under international law are being committed. All countries must refrain from supplying Israel with arms and military material, including related technologies, parts and components, technical assistance, training, financial or other assistance. They should also call on states supplying arms to Palestinian armed groups to refrain from doing so. Refrain from any statement or action that would, even indirectly, legitimize Israel's crimes and violations in Gaza. Pressure Israel to lift its illegal 16-year blockade of the Gaza Strip, which amounts to collective punishment of Gaza's population, is a war crime and is a key aspect of Israel's apartheid system. Ensure the International Criminal Court's ongoing investigation into the situation of Palestine receives full support and all necessary resource. 4. The Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. 2. Urgently expedite its ongoing investigation into the situation of Palestine, examining alleged crimes by all parties, and including the crime against humanity of apartheid against Palestinians.
And I want to thank Amnesty International for those statements. You can go online, go to Amnesty International online, and you can find those statements. They'll give you just a little history and what they're suggesting as far as trying to work on ending this problem that's been going on for thousands of years in Palestine. And this is what, Amnesty International and other groups out there are doing, but you don't hear that much about them. But here on the Root Show, we will talk about that as far as working on issues of peace and justice all over the world. So we're going to continue discussion about Israel and Palestine right now. I'm gonna I took this from YouTube. This is and I would suggest that you go on this website, this page. This is really good. It's called History on Maps, and this is the history of Israel, Palestine, and the conflict there up until 2 years ago. Because obviously things have changed. But I just want you to listen to this, and if you don't pick up everything, go on to History on Maps and learn more. So let's hear this right now on the Root and Root Show.
Israel, the world's only Jewish state, located east of the Mediterranean Sea, and Palestine, the territory of the Arab population that hails from the Israel-controlled land, have long been known for their enduring conflict with the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The tension between Israel and Palestine has been deteriorating in years, climaxing with many violent clashes between the two sides. To understand the root of the Israel-Palestine conflict, we have to look back a few thousand years ago. Early history of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the 17 centuries BC, following the call of God, 3 patriarchs of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, settled in Canaan, a region approximating present-day Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, parts of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. The region later had the name the Land of Israel, the Promised Land, the Palestine region, or the Holy Land. In 1000 BC, King Saul established the Israelite monarchy, which then was ruled by King David, who made Jerusalem the capital of his kingdom, and his son King Solomon, who built the first temple in Jerusalem. After the death of King Solomon, the united monarchy was split into the Kingdom of Israel in the north, with Samaria as the capital, and the Kingdom of Judah in the south, with Jerusalem as the capital. The land became home to a majority of Jews, but then it was subject to numerous conquests of various groups, leading to the significant decrease of the Jewish population on the land. One of these conquests was conducted by the Roman Empire, who gave the name Palestine to Judah, intending to break the Jewish connection with the land of Israel. During this time, Christianity, which started as a Jewish sect, ultimately became a dominant religion toward the end of the Roman Empire. In the 7th century came an Arab conquest, beginning the spread of Islam. The Dome of the Rock was built on the ruin of the Second Temple, making Jerusalem the holy city to 3 monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. After Christians in Jerusalem were intensely persecuted by the Seljuk Turks, a Central Asian empire with ambition to expand its territory, Christians in Europe launched several crusades to bring the holy city back to the hand of the Christians. During this time, many Jews were killed. Others were making pilgrimages everywhere, mostly in Western Europe. From the 16th century to World War I, the Holy Land, along with much of the Middle East, was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, an Islamic superpower. The land was unofficially called Palestine. At the same time in Europe, more and more Jews were joining a movement called Zionism, aiming to create a Jewish national state in its ancient homeland. Hence, in the first decade of the 20th century, tens of thousands of Jews moved from Europe back to the region. Israel and Palestine under the British rule. World War I exploded and ended with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Its land in the Middle East was carved by the British and French empires. The British then gave more independence for Iraq and Jordan, and the region remaining under the control of Britain was what it called the British Mandate for Palestine, where Britain promised to establish a Jewish national homeland under its Balfour Declaration, which went into effect in 1923. Tensions between the Jews and the Arabs who both claimed the land grew, which even led to acts of violence. By the 1930s, following the increasing Jewish population in Palestine due to the fear of persecution during the Nazi reign in Germany, the British limited Jewish immigration. In response, the Jewish militias formed to both fight the Arabs and resist the British rule. Then came the Holocaust throughout Nazi Germany, which claimed almost 6 million Jewish lives. After the war, more and more Jews then fled from Europe to Palestine to seek a homeland, escalating the tension with the Arabs. Overwhelmed by the situation, Britain began to withdraw from the region. The birth of the Israel State. After World War II, the UN proposed a plan to partition Palestine into two independent states, a Jewish state and an Arab state, with the city of Jerusalem becoming an international zone with a special status. However, the plan according to which the Jewish, accounting for only 1/3 of the population, was granted more territory, 56.5% of the land, was rejected by the Arabs. They began to form volunteer armies throughout Palestine. Less than 1 year after that, as Britain completed its withdrawal from Palestine, Israel declared itself an independent state, marking a new, bloodier chapter in the struggle between the Jews and the Palestinian Arabs. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Right after the announcement of an independent Israel, a war between the Arabs and the Jews broke out, which was known as the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The war involved 5 recently independent Arab nations: Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, the Arab League, who invaded the region in an attempt to establish a unified Arab Palestine. However, a ceasefire agreement was reached a year later in which more than 2/3 of historic Palestine, including the West Jerusalem, belonged to Israel, while Jordan occupied East Jerusalem and the area known as the West Bank, and Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip. As a result, more than 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from the land where they lived for centuries on the day that they call Al-Nakba, or the catastrophe. With the deteriorated dispute between the Jews and the Arabs, there came more wars and fighting in the following decades. The 60-Day War. It was in 1967 when the 60-Day War broke out after a volatile period of diplomatic friction and skirmishes between Israel and its neighboring Arab states, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. This brief war ended with the victory of Israel, giving Israel control over the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. Sinai was later returned to Egypt under the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty. After the war, most Palestinian refugees and their descendants were not allowed to return to their homes, but had to live in Gaza, the West Bank, and neighboring Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. The First Intifada and the Oslo Accords. The rising number of Israelis settling in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank and Gaza gave rise to the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, first founded in Cairo, Egypt in 1964 to create a liberated Palestine in Israel. The PLO launched attacks on Israel from its base in Jordan. It was then forced to move from Jordan to Lebanon, starting to carry out acts of terrorism against Israel. Fighting went on for years, including the Israeli invasion of Lebanon to kick the PLO out of Beirut. The PLO eventually agreed to divide the land between Palestine and Israel, but there were still more and more Jewish settlers moved into the Israel-occupied Palestinian territories. In 1987, a violent Palestinian uprising was ignited, starting from the Jabalia refugee camp after an Israeli Defense Forces truck collided with 2 Palestinian civilian vans, killing 4 of them. This was known as the First Intifada. This bloody conflict, resulting in hundreds of deaths, triggered a peace process with the signing of the Oslo Accords by Israel and the PLO. The Oslo I Accord signed in Washington, D.C., and the Oslo II Accord in Taba, Egypt. According to the Oslo Accords, the West Bank was divided into 3 areas. Area A was exclusively controlled by the Palestinians. Area B was controlled by both the Palestinians and Israel. Area C was fully controlled by Israel. The Second Intifada. Though further peace talks continued in 2000, the Israelis and Palestinians could not reach agreements on issues like the status of Jerusalem, rights of refugees, and the increased Jewish settlement in Palestinian lands. Ariel Sharon, a Jewish Israeli who would later become Israel's prime minister, visited the Temple Mount, home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. The action was deemed offensive by many Palestinians, and the Second Intifada broke out. The violence ended with Israel's withdrawal from Gaza, but continued to settle in the West Bank. Israel conflict with Hamas. Hamas is a Sunni Islamist militant group aiming to destroy the state of Israel and create an Islamic state. After the armed conflict between Hamas and Fatah, who managed the PLO, Hamas split from the Palestinian Authority and gained power in the Gaza. Israel put Gaza under a suffocating blockade, leading to several bloody wars between the two groups in the Gaza Strip, including Operation Cast Lead, Operation Pillar of Defense, and Operation Protective Edge. In 2014, Hamas and Fatah reached agreement to form a national unity government. In 2018, the U.S. Embassy was relocated from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which was deemed by the Palestinians as a signal of American support for Jerusalem as Israel's capital. 2021, the conflict between Israel and Palestine was reassumed by a series of hostile events in East Jerusalem, leading to several acts of violence until a ceasefire deal brokered by Egypt, Qatar, and the United Nations came into effect on May 21st. Peaceful though it may seem now, the complex and long-lasting territorial dispute between two states is a ticking time bomb that can explode any time. Thanks for watching. If you find this information useful, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to...
And you didn't watch it, you listened to it. But anyway, I know there was a lot of information I've given you in the last half hour about what's going on in Palestine and Israel. But, just listen to this again, or go look at the different sources. Look at the Amnesty International report I talked about on here. Just do your diligence and just learn about what's going on, because I'm speaking to Americans now, those are in America listening to my show. Your tax dollars are going to fund what's going on over there in Israel. Remember that. As Biden said, he's got all this money, he can fund 2 wars. So you should know where your money's going and why it's going over there. It's a touchy situation, touchy subject to deal with. I can tell you frankly, a couple of years ago, actually over 8 years ago, when I was doing shows about Palestine and Israel, and I had actually, as I was mentioning earlier, I had Connie on here talking about this film, Martin Luther King in Palestine, Al Him. I lost, and these weren't real friends I found out on Facebook, but these were folks who were Jewish, who supposedly were friends of mine, but they didn't like me talking about Israel and Palestine. They didn't like that. And that showed me their true colors, what they really were about. They weren't really friends. I never even looked at them really as friends, but you will lose people on this issue. You will lose them. But you got to stick to your guns. You really have to, if you believe in a certain thing, don't let anyone persuade you to go their way. If you believe something, stick with it. Over the years, there have been many folks who have talked about this situation, African Americans who have been like ostracized. I can think about my pastor in D.C. way back when, Reverend Walter Fauntleroy. He led a group over to Palestine back in the 70s. He came back. He was attacked. He was attacked for that. Mark Moore Hill, you might know him, a commentator. He's on Al Jazeera. Used to be on CNN. And I say used to be on CNN. But once that Mark Moore Hill started talking about Palestine, they kicked him off. And he's on Al Jazeera now. He's on some other things. But you got, and I can think when Andrew Young was ambassador to the UN in the 70s, appointed by Jimmy Carter. He made some comments. In fact, I think he met with the PLO, and he had to resign because of that. It's like you can't talk about, especially an African American, you can't talk about that subject. But I will talk about it. And it might offend some folks on here, what I have played today. So I'm not playing the music like I usually do. I think this is a serious subject because it's affecting everyone all over the world. That we should talk about it, analyze it, and come to your own conclusions. You don't have to agree with me or anything, because I haven't said that you should do this or that. The only thing I'm saying is just research and learn for yourself. Take the time just to study the issue. Don't depend on just CNN, MSNBC, Fox, or someone on YouTube who doesn't know what they're talking about. They got to axe the grind. really study this issue, any issue in general. I always tell you that, but this one now, really look at it. I mean, it's just really awful to realize that in America right now, you got folks that are attacking Palestinians who don't, and some people who they don't even know they are Palestinians, but they're just attacking. And the little boy I learned about that was murdered, 6 years old, because he was Palestinian. His mother was stabbed, but the boy was stabbed and murdered by a deranged, sick person, just who hated Palestinians. It's just ridiculous. So stop, that mess has got to stop. But it's going, and I know I've heard in Europe the same thing is going on. That folks, and not only Palestinians, but anyone, Arab, anyone who they feel may be Palestinian or connected with a Palestinian or just being Arab or Islamic, they're attacking them. And it's so sad. That's so sad to see that going on. So I hope that really stops now. Before it just escalates. And once you kill someone, it escalated then. But let's just stop that now. Do some research. Learn something about this situation. Go to rallies and learn about what folks are saying about this. And I have to say this, and this might offend some folks. Go to rallies on both sides. Hear what both parties are saying. Go to rallies that are supporting Israel. Go to rallies that are supporting Palestine and just learn. I think you'll come up with the right answer once you go to both of them. I can tell you that. But the thing is, just learn what's going on. And don't be swayed by the whole thing that, I'm saying again that black folks, we got to support Israel first because it's the Holy Land. We got to do that. It's in the Bible. Most of you don't even know what's in the Bible. Most of you can't even read the Bible. I've never even read anything, just quoting things. And most of you can't even translate Latin or Aramaic, so you don't even know what's really in there. But anyway, so just think about what you're saying first and learn. Learn something. Just don't go lockstep and barrel with what you're supposed to say based on what someone in the media or some official said. Think about it first and learn and study. But anyway, let me get off the soapbox for now. Until next time. But anyway, this is Greg Rashid, Go in Love and Go in Peace, the Root and Root Show. And again, help someone in need. There are so many people in need right now. Do what you can in your community, in your farm area, your province, wherever you are, just to help someone in need, especially a young person and a senior. Because we're all in this together. No matter what you may think, we're all in this together. So do what you can. Wake up every morning. Look in that mirror. First thing you say is love yourself. Because if you can't love yourself and give yourself a hug, you can't do anything. You can't help anyone. And if you're sight impaired, when you wake up, just hug yourself and say, I love myself. Because if you can't do anything unless you love yourself, that's the first commandment of all faith, of everything, is to love yourself. Because when you love yourself, you can love everyone. You can do much more. But again, this is Greg Rashid, coming from Bangkok, Thailand, with the Root and Root Show. Go out there and study, go out and learn, and we'll be talking more about what's going on over there. We'll have some music again. We'll have that, But again, right now, just learn about the subject, what's going on in Palestine and Israel. But again, Greg Rashid, go in love and go in peace. We'll see you next time on the Root and Root Show. If you want to contact me, just go to my Facebook site, Gregory, Gregory, Rashid, Rasheed. Yeah, I talk to folks there all the time. Also, go to my YouTube channel, Nourish by History. Again, Nourish by History on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel. But we'll see you next time. Go in love and go in peace. See you next time on the Root Show.
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. And remember, spread the knowledge, share the power.